Hello, everyone, and welcome to Death and Grief Talk Live. My name is Joelle Simone Maldonado. I am also known as the Grave Woman. I am a licensed funeral director and embalmer, licensed insurance agent, death care educator, sacred death and grief care practitioner. I have over a decade of service working in the death care industry, and I'm dedicated to helping everyone navigate individual journeys with death, grief, everything in between in a way that helps people find peace, purpose, and life through death and grief. So, death and grief are sacred aspects of our human journey that we all witness. We honor and we process them all uniquely as individuals. The Death and Grief Talk podcast, which is what inspired Death and Grief Talk Live, is here to host an open, honest conversation about the questions that come up related to death and grief, our fears, our anxieties, and the emotions that we all experience when someone dies. So that's what we're here to talk about today. I am so excited to be here with you. I'm not even sure if anyone is watching, but if you are, could you please just let me know in the chat section? So, I wanted to share a little story. This morning, when getting ready for this, I was thinking a lot about okay, what am I going to get on live? What am I going to talk about? Why would people want to tune in and talk about this? And the thing that kept coming to me is stop waiting for permission. Stop waiting for permission to do what you know is in your heart. And I say that because I think a lot of times when we talk about death and grief, especially when it relates to grief, we want to wait for permission to feel a certain way, to express what we're thinking and how we're feeling. And just we wait for permission to express ourselves in various ways. And so that's my theme for today. Stop waiting for permission. What is it that you have been waiting for permission to do as far as your grief journey is concerned? I know when I've experienced grief in the past, two different times when someone's passed away, my grandfather and then my uncle. When my grandfather passed away, he was a very stoic person. He wasn't a very emotional individual. And I felt as if I couldn't express my emotions through crying or really falling apart because that's not who he was. And I felt like if I did that, I wouldn't have been honoring him. And so it was really a long time before I allowed myself to break down and cry and to really have that moment. And I remember it came out of nowhere. Um, I just wanted to remind everyone that you can leave your comments and stories in the chat. That just popped up and scared me. But um, yeah, I felt like I couldn't really express myself in that way. So I didn't for a long time. I was in a way waiting for permission, not or permission to do that. When my uncle passed away, I was angry for a really, really long time. And it hit me that I was waiting on permission not to be angry anymore. Angry with him, angry about the situation, angry that I felt like like he chose alcohol over his family. And I I was waiting for permission for me to accept that he he was gone and it was okay. So my question to you all, and feel free to leave your comments in the chat. I'll be able to see them here. That my question is, what is it that you're waiting on? What is it that you're waiting for permission for? And while I wait for you guys to jump in the chat, I want to encourage you to not wait on permission. You don't need permission to feel a certain way. You don't need permission to respond a certain way. You don't need permission to express your grief in whatever way comes naturally to you. Crying is okay. Breaking down is okay. Not being able to move forward in some senses is okay. it's also okay to move on from the more difficult parts of grief. I talk to a lot of people a lot of time, and particularly one person very close to me, where certain times of year and certain things that happen, it throws many of us back into the depths of our grief, right? Especially if it's been a while since someone has passed away. And I feel as if, when talking specifically to this individual and others that I've come in contact with professionally, that many times people remain in this in certain patterns with their grief because they're afraid that by not remaining in those patterns, that they're not honoring that person who has passed away. And so my response to that is that it is okay to move forward. Like, you don't have to wait on permission to move forward in your grief. And I know that sounds, well, I hope it doesn't sound insensitive, because I don't intend it to be. However, it's okay to move forward in your journey with grief. So, my intention again with coming on here is to answer any of your questions, comments, and just have some open and honest conversation about death and grief. That's why it's called Death and Grief Talk Live with the Grave Woman, and to just offer some encouragement through whatever ways that I can. I've allotted an hour for this conversation, but if we don't receive any questions or comments, of course, it'll be a lot shorter. So again, feel free to share your questions and comments in the comment section. So again, my question to you is, what is it that you're waiting on permission for? Hi, Sherry. I congratulations on your beautiful baby. Every time I see you guys online, my heart melts. And I know that you recently lost a cousin. So I want to say my condolences, or express my condolences to you and your family. I will say I saw the video that you posted, where you all were placing the flowers into the grave after her burial. And it was just so beautiful. The snow, the flowers, you and your family, I know you all were grieving, but you all just looked so beautiful. I find beauty in photos and videos like that, because you can see the love that people are expressing to their loved ones when they pass away. And so thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that part of your journey with all of your followers. Thank you for watching and tuning in this morning. So, does anyone have any questions? I actually have a few questions that I wrote down about permission. The first one is, what are we grieving in this season? Like, what are we giving ourselves permission to grieve in this season? For me in particular, a lot of things have happened, especially if you're a part of my YouTube audience. You know that I started practically on YouTube and used to share videos consistently. And I built a very, very large community on YouTube of people where we were sharing our grief journey. And one of the things that I've been grieving over the past 2 years since getting married and moving to another state is my friendships and the closeness that I had in my community in Atlanta, and also the closeness that I had with my YouTube community. And so I realized that about 2 weeks ago, that I've really been grieving that connection. And so I decided I'm going to give myself time and space to grieve what was, while opening up my heart to what's to come. And so in this season, I'm allowing myself to grieve that. And fortunately for some of the friendships, and especially with my YouTube community, I've decided that I can reinvest in rebuilding this relationship, and particularly with my online community, through doing things like this. And with friendships, some of them, making more of an effort to remain connected in unique ways. Have any of you all ever experienced like a grief that's not tied to necessarily someone or I apologize for that, guys. My internet went out for a quick second. I hope that you all can still hear and see me okay. But yeah, I was basically saying that I'm grieving that in this season, giving myself time and permission to experience that loss while that I can. So the next question that I thought of is not really so much a question about giving yourself permission to grieve. It's about giving yourself permission to really experience something good. And that question is, what is the absolute best thing in your life in this season? Right? Like, I know a lot of times when we're grieving, in particularly the loss of a person, but it could be a job, a relationship, a pet, just anything that you feel like you've lost. It's really hard to focus on and recognize that there's still things that are positive happening in our lives and in our reality, right? So I think it's important to give ourselves the permission to recognize and celebrate the absolute best things that are happening in our life, in our communities, in our realities. And so for me personally, I started thinking about this and the list kept getting longer and longer. The first thing is I'm very excited and grateful for my marriage, even with all the challenges that come with being a newlywed. And even though I grew up in South Carolina, moving back to a new state and reacclimating here, or just the challenges of two people becoming one, that is one of the absolute best things in my life right now. Another thing is the growth of business and of being close to family again. So, those are some of the most absolute best things in my life right now. And I'd love to hear from you all, even though we may be experiencing loss or grieving various things. And that's the unique thing about grief. We're all going to experience it differently. We're all going to have a different relationship with it. But what is the absolute best thing that's happening in your life right now? And to stick with our theme, how are you going to give or show up for yourself and give yourself permission to celebrate and enjoy that thing, even though there are things that we're grieving in this season? And the last question is, what are you most grateful for? And I think that there's so much power in gratitude where um you could be having like a horrible moment, whether it's in grief or just in life, and you start thinking about the things that you're grateful for, and before you know it, you're feeling so much better. And again, I did this exercise last night as I was laying in bed falling asleep, and I started with the pillow my head was laying on. I'm so grateful for this pillow. I'm so grateful for this bed. I'm so grateful for this blanket. I'm grateful that I have a bedroom that's in a house that's, you know, warm and safe. And the list just keeps getting longer and longer. And I think, again, by giving ourselves permission, even in grief, to think about what we're grateful for, think about us, think about things that are going good in our lives. Not that it takes that grief away, not that it makes it quote unquote better, but it does open the door for us to realize, even in those moments of grief and loss and sorrow, that we still have a lot to be grateful for. Grief leads to revelation, it leads to realization not only of loss and experience of loss, but a lot of times it can lead to, I don't want to say necessarily positive, but revelation about how much we have. There's so much going on in the world right now that even if we aren't experiencing grief and loss in our personal lives, we're experiencing grief and loss. What is it called? Living vicariously through other people, through what we see on the news, what we see on social media. And so I think having those questions and giving ourselves that permission to say, you know what is it that I'm grieving in this season? What's the absolute best thing in my life despite this? And what am I grateful for? It's almost like an injection of positivity. And in no way am I saying that you should paint your grief or your experience with loss with a brush of positivity. However, I think that and believe in duality. I've been posting a lot about Black death care and honoring ancestors and things like that. And my joke is everybody wants to talk about ancestors, but nobody wants to die. And in a sense, what that is saying to me is that I think sometimes we forget we are a part of a cycle of life. That cycle of life for some of us starts with birth. Some of us believe we exist in a realm or an ether prior to birth, but it starts with birth. Well, let's just start there. And then it moves on through life and love and relationships and sex and eating and using the bathroom. Like all of these things are a part of life, right? But the thing that we resist a lot of times as human beings is that part of the cycle where we accumulate all of this experience and then we transcend to what's next in the cycle. I don't necessarily believe the cycle of life ends with death, but it is that death part that a lot of us have a hard time reckoning with. And I feel like, especially in our society here in the United States, where a lot of times we're age avoidant, like we don't want to talk about getting older, or we tuck our elderly away, or we, especially after COVID, either we had the realization and awakening that death is really not just a part of an elderly person's life, but anybody's life. We try to kind of skip over that step. And then we experience grief when things are lost. If you really think about it, not only are we in a constant state of dying, but we're in a constant state of grief and realization. We're constantly getting older. If you celebrated a birthday recently, you're no longer the age you were before. You've now progressed into the next age. And though you may not think about it, in a sense, you're never going to be young again or as young as you were. So we don't think about that as a level of grief, but it is. And so a lot of times we only process grief as this thing that happens when life ends or a relationship ends, right? Or when something is lost. But me personally, I feel as if maybe if we were to acknowledge, recognize, and sit with grief on a daily basis and think about the things that we've lost and grieved. And again, I'm not trying to say that anything compares to losing a loved one. What I'm saying is that we'd honor the cycle of life more. I see that we have a few comments that have come in, so I'm going to add them to the screen. Griefscape says, I agree about gratitude. What we focus towards, we have, and I don't know what the rest of that comment was supposed to say, but you're absolutely right. A lot of times, again, it's so easy, especially when we're in moments of grief and loss, to only focus on what has been lost, right? I think about my uncle. I actually went and met with his wife and his mother-in-law, my Aunt Janine and Grandma Ginger, yesterday. And we sat and had lunch together. And at first, I felt myself sinking into, oh my gosh, I'm so sad. Uncle Mark's not here. You know, it would have been great for him to meet my husband. He would have loved sitting here. He would have loved just being a part of this moment. And I felt myself sinking and not even having the experience of being present with people who loved and connected with and are still connected to our family. And so, and that we are family with. And so once I shifted my mindset into a place of gratitude, I started having thoughts like, wow, how happy would Uncle Mark be to know that almost 10 years after his passing. Wow, 10 years will be next year. I didn't even realize that. So this is 9. So 9 years after his passing, we're still connected. We're still family. We're still making time to see each other. Or, oh my gosh, we made it here safely. We traveled on the highway. Like I just started being grateful, and it completely changed the dynamic of the experience I was having. So thank you so much for your comment. If you would please finish it. I don't know what happened. I know it gets cut off on the cell phone sometimes when I do that as well, if you're using a cell phone. Our next comment says, greetings. I'm visiting my family in SC following my uncle's passing last week. We've lost 12 people since 2020. It's challenging to say the least. And that is from Queen of Forces Healing Ministry. First and foremost, Queen, I want to say that I am sending prayers and love to your family. I cannot imagine losing 12 people since 2020, which was 4 years ago. That is a lot of people to lose in such a short amount of time. But I just want to say thank you for sharing. We are definitely sending love and prayers of peace and strength to your family and to you. And just thank you so much for sharing. We have another comment. Family members often lean on me and wonder, has a person come to me and said anything? And I have to find ways to comfort myself. Okay, so now we're getting into a good conversation. Based on your comment, I am going to imagine that you are gifted and can possibly communicate with those that have transitioned and crossed over. And obviously your family is aware of that. And so my question to you, if you're still watching, is how do you comfort yourself when you have that gift? And how do you comfort yourself when others are depending on your strength and your gift in the moments when you just want to grieve? um, I'm very curious to know. Like yourself, I have a gift of communicating with those that have crossed over, transitioned, died, however you want to put it. And a lot of times, just professionally, when someone in my family passes away, I'm the person that is seen to be or deemed to be the strongest when it comes to dealing with death and grief because of what I do professionally. And so I completely can resonate with what you're saying. And again, it's about finding that balance for me where I'm experiencing a loss and grieving, but also grateful for the gift that the connection doesn't die with the death, right? But then it's also honestly a little annoying and frustrating sometimes when everybody's like, well, tell me what they said. Did they come to visit you? Did you dream about them? And it's like, well, I'm having my moment as well. So again, duality, being grateful, recognizing the good and the best in the situation, but balancing it as well. We have another comment from Griefscapes. All change is a kind of loss and grief. You are absolutely right. And again, I don't want to make it seem like we're saying that the loss of a loved one is not a tremendous loss and that grief experience with that is not justified. It's not personal, and it's not huge, because it really is. And I would not dare tell anyone how to experience their grief journey. However, what I am saying is that there's an opportunity to not only grieve, but also recognize and be awakened to so many things beyond the emotions of sadness and depression and things like that. I had someone say, grief is not an emotion, it's an experience. And I had never thought about it that way. And she went further to say that that experience includes things like joy and bliss and excitement, and but it also includes things like turmoil and wrenching, gut wrenching pain and realization of loss. But many times focused on the one thing, which is the negative I don't know, we said negative, the more uncomfortable or just sadness of it. But there's so much more to the experience, and all of it is real. So Queen of Forces Healing Ministry says gratitude certainly does help. I mean, I think gratitude is the elixir of life. Like, it has to be, right? Like, when you, like last night, I was exhausted, I was tired, I was still carrying a little bit of that, damn, I wish my uncle was here today. You know what I mean? But when I laid down and I really started, I got to the point where I was saying thank you for the doorknobs. Like, it was that serious for me. So yes, gratitude always does help. Thank you for your condolences and being here. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Like, I am here for you all. I'm the one talking, but I'm here for you. So thank you for being here. Queen says, I cry at the altar and in the shower mostly. I have to rest as much as I can. Okay, so let me ask you a question about that. I find that I require a lot of sleep. Like, I mean, I love a nap. I will take a nap at the drop of a dime, right? But I feel like there's something that spiritually happens, especially after I've exerted a lot of mental and spiritual energy. I require so much sleep. Um, and at one point I was worried, like I found out that I have really low iron and vitamin D deficient, like many African American men and women, but it almost seemed like unnatural the amount of sleep that I required. And so I started doing research, and I've been finding that a lot of people that have similar gifts as far as clairvoyance, clairaudience, especially being able to communicate and walk between realms, they have that need as well. What do you think that's about? Some people don't understand that grief can be difficult for mediums. Oh, yeah, that's a good word, mediums. And I'm grateful for the gift, though. Definitely grateful. So when you say that you're a medium and your loved ones are just, or is it just your loved ones that come to you, or is it just anyone's loved ones? Do do you find that what was my question? Oh my God, it just went away. Am I grateful for you? That was the question. Is it just your loved ones, or is it just anybody that comes to you? And what boundaries have you put in place to help you not only maintain your sanity, but keep that door closed to a certain extent or as open as you want it? But yeah, gratitude is definitely the elixir of life. That we've gotten a few more that have joined us, a few more people, and we're just having open honest dialect about death and grief. We've started talking about mediums and being able to communicate with people on the other side. We've had some great questions, or not questions, comments about gratitude and the power that gratitude has when navigating our grief journeys. And we've also talked about the fact that grief is an experience more so than an emotion. And that experience includes a variety of emotions: bliss, satisfaction, adventure, loneliness, depression, anxiety. For some people, they get to the point where they question whether they want to live in this realm anymore without the one that they love. And for others, they're empowered to live and grab life by the balls, so to speak, and not miss a moment of what life has to offer. And it's that duality that a lot of times we miss out on because we get so caught in the cycle of the sadness and depression. But through gratitude and through recognizing what are the best things happening in our life, despite what we've lost, we can move forward. Looks like we have more comments. Yes, I found out my iron, vitamin D, cortisol, and magnesium were low. Okay, definitely. So I'll tell you the things that have been helping me recently. I've been spending a little bit more time outside. I go and try to sit on my porch and soak up some vitamin D directly from the sun for about 15-20 minutes a day, or I'll just keep my dogs outside a little bit longer and walk them around in the sun if the weather's good. I've been making this juice that has beets, apples, carrots, beets, like they look like blood when you juice them. And the first time I did it, I will tell you that I felt amazing. And I'll tell you why. TikTok University, baby. TikTok is just as good as YouTube when it comes to things like this. Of course, move forward under the supervision of your medical professional. But I didn't know that vitamin C is essential in absorbing iron. So I added oranges to that mix. And oh my God, you have to be careful because oranges contain a lot of sugar, and so do apples. But adding a half an orange, I could feel my body absorbing the iron from the beets and other vegetables and fruits. So I hope that helps you. Um, and I think my doctor gave me a prescription for some iron, but if anybody out there is familiar with taking an iron supplement, it constipates you. And that is just something I don't want to deal with right now. So I honestly haven't picked it up. But I hope that helps if you can find any comfort or relief in that. I hear all kinds of transitions, folks, but I do set boundaries. I close off to spirit folk that aren't related to me when I'm in the thick of grief. Oh, good for you, definitely. So, to be honest with you, you mentioned the altar. I have never set up an altar, and I'm using that word in the air quotes generally because I've never set up an altar outside of myself, if that makes sense. It is something that I want to do. It's just not something that I've been or I'm curious about doing, but I haven't been impressioned to do it yet. And so I'm curious if you would share what is the significance of the altar to you? My belief is that I am the altar, like my work, like me doing what I'm doing right now is me going to what I believe is the altar and making my sacrifice, which is my time, my attention, I'm pouring my heart, my soul, all of my energy is present with this right now. And just as much as I hope you all are getting from this really isn't about me doing it to appease you. I feel as if I'm doing what I'm doing because I've been called by the ancestors and by the Spirit of God to give it out. And it will go forth and do whatever it is it's supposed to do. So that's how I feel my relationship with my altar. It's not like a physical thing that exists in my home. But I'm curious, what is the significance of the physical altar to you? You say beets are life, sis. Yes, they are. Oh my God, beets are life. And the thing is, I've always loved beets, and I think that's probably why. Like I can eat them pickled, love beet juice. Like, oh, they're so good. Yes, my VC was low also. You are talking right. Beets and dandelion are my go-to for iron. Okay, I think I might try some dandelion tea though. That's another thing I've been really thinking about getting into is making different types of tea. I saw this peach ginger tea on Etsy that I really want to try. It just sounds like it would be delicious. So I will definitely look into getting some dandelion tea. What do you mean by altar? So when I think of an altar, right, I think of a physical, you could call this an altar, I guess. So what this is where I keep like my oils, my candles, some of my crystals, and my goddess statue, right? That is where they live in my home, right? I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, Queen, but when I envision an altar, ancestral altar, I imagine maybe something like this or a table or a designated area in someone's home or personal space where things that keep it's a place that honors their presence, right? So people put pictures, they may have an altar cover, which is some type of sheet or sacred garment that these things lay on. There would be things that maybe belong to the person who's transitioned on that altar. And that is where that lives in their home. Or their personal space. It's a very sacred place that is designated to honoring that person's loved ones who have transitioned, right? And there are, depending on what you believe, certain guidelines onto how it's supposed to be set up. I'm not going to talk about that part because I don't know enough to speak intelligently about it, but maybe candles, things that represent the elements, something that contains water, candles, fire, like a candle. I keep saying candle, incense, just things that represent the elements. And then that is where a person may make offerings such as food or prayers or petitions, or sit and spend time with the spirit of that person who's transitioned. That's the best way I can explain it. Hopefully Queen will give us more insight since she brought it up. We are the altar. Exactly. Okay, so I'm not too far far-fetched in my belief about, okay, we are the altar. Okay, thank you. Queen also says, it helps me to have a tangible physical thing or location to go and honor my folks. It helps me to have a focal point of reference. Okay, so I wasn't too far off. So again, to answer your question, Griefscapes, what do you mean by altar? We're going to define it by a tangible physical thing or location to go and honor my folks. It helps me to have a focal point of reverence. Okay, so, and we create altars in various ways. Like, I am of the belief that when it comes to a spiritual practice, that is a very personal thing, right? So, for some people, it may be that physical thing or something like this that's behind me, right? When I got married, in essence, I created an altar to my husband's relatives who's transitioned, his mother and his grandmother, and my relatives, my grandfathers and my uncle who've transitioned, because we had a section at our wedding that was a memory table. It had their pictures, we had candles on it, um we had some sage on there, some Palo Santo. We had different things to keep that area neutral, peaceful, but pay reverence to them and to welcome their spirits to our wedding. For me, I believe that when you have an altar or something like that set up, you're welcoming that spirit to dwell in whatever space it's in, right? So we set that up. Not only that, but we had on his brooch, he had a picture of his grandmother. I got a picture of his grandmother so that he could put it on his boutonniere and tie it to him. I also had pictures of my grandfathers and my uncle on my bouquet. So those things could have been considered altars. So it's not necessarily that it has to look a certain way. I think it's more about the intentionality and what it represents to the person that's either has it or that is creating it. Let's see, we have some more comments. Griefscapes says, okay, I wasn't sure if you were speaking specifically about faith. I have a grief altar in my home, the kind of an ofrenda. Is that how you say that? I apologize if I didn't say that correctly. But all of my lost loves are there to meet and greet and give me advice. Okay, so I'm seeing a trend here that many of us on this chat or this stream today believe in the connection of or believe that we maintain a connection with those that have passed away. I know 100% that I do because I can talk to them. I don't see them, thank God, but I can talk and communicate with them in various ways. But for me, it's not something that I can necessarily turn on and turn off. For me, it's more like dreams or a sense of knowing or, do this. Like even doing this today, like I had no idea. I have my notes here and you can see I had here that it's like it says it's supposed to be a story that I opened up with. My prayer was, God, please give me a story and word of encouragement because I didn't necessarily know what I was going to be talking about, right? And so this morning, again, that thing about permission came to me. I believe that came from God and the spirit of my ancestors. So yeah, but I'm noticing that we all kind of share that common belief, right? And so if you follow me on social media, you know that this morning my post was about guides and guardians. A lot of cultures believe in guides and guardians that present themselves to those that are in transition um, to help them get to where they're going in the continued cycle, right? And so I'm curious to know two things. What are your culture's belief about guides and guardians as it relates to death in the afterlife or the continuation of the cycle of life? And what do you think the purpose of the guides and guardians are in our life? Yes, I have a table with pics, special items, a list of names, candles, graveyard dirt, etc. Awesome. I love that. Sounds absolutely beautiful. I am, like I said, I believe I explained what I believe the altar. I've explained what I believe the altar is and how I honor it. But it is something that actually my husband and I have talked about doing in a specific area in our home, just creating a space, because we moved into the home that my grandparents built 50 years ago, right? After we got married. And so the way that the home was left was as if people were coming home the next day. Someone broke into the house. My grandmother moved out, and she left the house like she was going to be coming home the next day. And so when we moved in almost 13 years later, everything in the house is still exactly as it was when I was a kid and growing up, right? And so we had to do a lot of work on the outside. I'm rambling at this point, but now we're at the point where we're wanting to decorate and make the home our own. And so the one thing that we both said was the first thing we wanted to do was create a space that honored not only people that have died, but like that honored our families, right? And so we we've talked about that, but I don't necessarily know if that would be an altar or if it would just be, I don't know, thinking about how we defined it, perhaps it would, I don't know. It is personal and tailored to your needs, preferences, but representing the elements slash forces is crucial from my perspective. They will also give us ideas on how to set it up and can change. Okay, so yeah, this is beautiful. Thank you guys so much for sharing and just being so vulnerable. We're about at the 42-minute mark, and I do want to keep this right at an hour. So we have about 18 minutes left. So if you guys have any specific questions or comments or want to contribute to this wonderful conversation that we're having, please do. Grief Skates says, I am the altar too. I love that. They're all present with me, even though they're not here, even ones I never had a chance to meet. Yes. So here goes that story that I prayed for. My name is Joelle, right? I am named after my father's sister. Her name was Joella. She passed away when she was 4 years old, right? I think my dad was 2 years old, maybe 2 or 3. She and my father, even for those young ages, were extremely close. My father said that he always knew he was going to have a little girl. And when he had this little girl, he was going to name her Joelle in honor of his sister, Joella, right? And so, me not even knowing this as a little child or comprehending, because I've always been told about Joella, but comprehending as a kid what death and her dying at 4 years old and how attached my father was to her, not even having like a true cognitive understanding of all of these things, I have always known that I, in a sense, am my own individual, my own person, but a continuation of her, if that makes sense. So when you say that they are always present and with you, I understand that on such a deep level that I cannot even begin to explain to you. So definitely they are always with us. I saw this thing, and it's like kind of like a dirty joke, whatever, but basically it was saying, if we believe that our ancestors are constantly with us, does that mean even when we're doing things like having sex or using the bathroom? And I think about that a lot of times, like, what are the places where the guides, the guardians that I asked about, what boundaries do they have, right? Because I, not that I believe that they're God, like omnipresent, but I believe that if they're constantly with us, that means they're constantly with us. So there has to be a boundary that exists, right? And you talked about setting up those boundaries, Queen. Are those boundaries that just naturally exist? And I'm being a little funny, but I mean, I think about that sometimes. To me, that's a real question. Karen says, I love all of this. I'm just 12 days into my grief journey for my mom, and I have been having trouble with my feelings. And hearing you guys talk about different ways to channel your grief and feelings is helping give me ideas. Karen, I don't even I, I don't even know what to say. I am just so grateful that spirit, the ancestors, the guides, the guardians guided you to this conversation and that it's giving you comfort. My condolences to you and your family. I can't imagine, you know, what you must be going through, but I'm just so grateful that you're here today. I don't know when you hopped on to the conversation, but we asked the questions, what are you grieving in this season? What is the absolute best thing in your life right now, despite your grief in this season? And what are things you're most grateful for? And we ask those questions because a lot of times we seek permission to have certain experiences during our journeys with grief. And I shared before that I had a student one time that said to me that grief is not an emotion, it's an experience. And that experience includes the entire spectrum of emotions, not just the sadness, not just the pain, not just the hurt, even though those things are extremely valid and extremely real, right? And you have full permission to and freedom and autonomy to have those. But at the same time, you also have freedom and autonomy to experience the bliss, the happiness, the adventure, the positive memories, the joy, and all of those things. So thank you so much for sharing, for tuning in, and we're all praying for you. I'm going to speak on behalf of all of us because we're a community and that's the energy that we give out. I believe that love does not go anywhere, and that is the connection. The thread that binds us is even more, the thread that binds us in a more eternal way. Okay, definitely. I watched this, I don't even want to call it a documentary. It was just like this thing on, I think, Netflix one time, and it was about this red string, right? And these people were like in this country overseas and they were on this mission to walk through all of the continents that were connected or countries that were connected from where they were with this red string and tell like their story. And I've heard stories about like the silver cord that's like our ethereal cord that connects us to the ether, and you get into like astral projection and things like that, right? And I've also heard like the or the string theory about like how you're always tied to your soulmate. But to think about like a string that connects us eternally to one another, even when someone dies, it puts me in the mind frame of like an umbilical cord, but on a much deeper level thing. And I use umbilical cord because Karen mentioned mother, but I don't think we give enough attention to like the esoteric meaning of behind how we come into this world or like our anatomy or things like that. I know that's going way off topic. I don't know if anybody's following me, but I feel like the fact that when we're developed in our mother's wombs, right? First being in the womb, then being connected by that blood force, that vitamin C and D and that iron we were talking about earlier, like being connected by that blood force through the umbilical cord, which then has to be severed for us to exist as individuals throughout the world. Like, I feel like that has meaning. Like that umbilical cord puts me in the mind of that thread that you're talking about that binds us, but it's severed while we exist physically, but still exists spiritually and connects us. Yeah, that's where my mind went. That sorry, went off topic. I tend to have several altars, but my ancestral altar is always set up and intended to and attended to first, unless I'm absolutely guided to do something differently. You know, you just said a mouthful with that about the thing that comes to my mind is religion versus ritual, right? So religion says there's a specific way you have to do things all the time. And ritual says that there's a certain way you do things when inspired, right? I fall in between the two because you're right. You have to wait until you're guided. I have not been guided or compelled to set up a physical altar. However, again, I talked about that, the offering of this, right? I've been compelled to make this my offering because I've been guided to. I've wanted to do talks like this for years, but didn't do it because I would have been doing it out of ego and not out of pure intention and guidance. So you said a lot with that. Queen says it, Griefscape. Yes, love is always with us. Thank you for saying that. I love that we're just learning and growing from each other. Griefscape says, I love you. Love to you, Karen. Prayers for you in your journey. Grief is all the things. Queen says, I think they naturally have boundaries with us in regards to our privacy. They don't think exactly like we do about our earthly experiences. You know what? That is so true. I wonder sometimes, like, when I become an ancestor or guide or guardian or whatever it is that is next in this cycle of life, right? I wonder, number one, what's my job going to be? Because I love being a funeral director. I love being a sacred grief practitioner, but I often ask myself, God, how come I couldn't come here and I've been baking cakes a lot lately. Like, why couldn't I come here and be like a baker or a plus size fashionista that has a boutique in several cities across the world? Like, why did this have to be my work? And I wonder if our assignments, that thread that connects us all, does it connect us throughout the entire cycle of what has been before and what is to come next? Like, I wonder if we resume roles throughout the entire cycle, throughout the ethers, throughout eternity, for whoever, in the work that we do. I really think about that a lot of times. Queen says, my condolence to you, Karen. May you be strengthened on your journey. Griefscape says, I agree with the cord cutting idea. Losing a parent has a duality to it. It's like losing a chunk of yourself, but also liberating you to be who you are without their presence. That cord cutting, that duality, you're right. And Karen, not to be insensitive to you and your journey. I pray that you know that's my intention or not my intention. But Griefscapes, I've heard people say that before. I worked with a wonderful nurse. I won't say her name here because I want to respect her privacy. When I worked at Emory, I worked with a wonderful nurse who said that she truly didn't become her true self until both of her mother and her grandmother who raised her passed away. She went through a severe depression and severe grief when they passed, like the depression, the agony, the pain. But she said she was at the point where she was awakening to her true self. And this is my language, not hers. This is how I interpret what she said. Once she had gone through her grieving process, because she realized she didn't need permission anymore. And God, thank you, because this is the whole point of what we're talking about today is permission. And she felt like because she had gone through that journey of caring for them, being their child, their granddaughter, honoring them throughout her life, it had granted her the permission to now live her authentic life as her authentic self. Not that she wasn't authentic in the journey with them or not herself with them, but that loss propelled her forward into her womanhood, so to speak. So maybe that's what we'll talk about next time. I'm going to make notes, write this down real quick. And we have about 5 minutes left. So if anyone wants to share any final thoughts in the chat, please do. But maybe we'll talk about the womanhood achieved by grief, or by the womanhood we acquire through navigating our grief journeys. I'll find a more eloquent way of stating that for our next time together. But I think that would be a good topic, especially since the majority of us here today, I imagine, are women. Your guidance, intuition is of the utmost importance. It's hard for me to follow hard and fast rules Gemini. Okay, definitely. That'll be when we talk. I'll add intuition on there. That will be a great topic. And guidance. And you're 100% correct. I believe 100% in following our intuition. I believe it is the language of God for women, our intuition. We know without knowing. Hi, Felicia. I see your heart. Thank you so much for tuning in. That's a powerful statement at Griefscapes. I understand that. Definitely. Well, you all, today has been a blessing to me, a great start to my Sunday and to the rest of this week. I would like to end our time together by again opening the floor for any last comments, questions, or anything. But before we leave, I would like to offer a word of prayer, not just for us, but for anyone who is going to see this or hear it after we're done, no matter when you see or hear this. I pray that it inspires you, that it connects to your heart, and that if you are experiencing grief, you're some way empowered by this recording, and that you're comforted and that you're given permission to have your authentic grief experiences, not based on anyone else's rules or guidelines or structure, but what is authentic to you, and that you experience all of what your journey has to offer, not just the sadness. So, dear God, dear Spirit, thank you so much for connecting us all today. I thank you for impressioning my heart with this offering, and that it is fruitful and empowering to those that have listened in real time, and that it will go forward and help and continue to build those that will listen in the future. We say a special prayer for Karen as she navigates the grief of her mother. We ask that you empower her, that you strengthen her, that you fill her with any and everything that she needs at this time. Thank you for everybody that has participated in this conversation. And thank you for allowing me to be the vessel that has brought it forward. In Spirit's name we pray. Amen. Thank you, guys.